So fragments always sits inside an activity. So no matter fragments cannot survive independently. Instead, the fragments life cycle always depends on the activity's life cycle. Now, how does it depend on the activity, and what is the basic life cycle of a fragment? Those things we'll see right now. Oops, I just missed the image. Just give me a second. Okay, got it. Now, this is the fragment life cycle that we were talking about. Now, what is this fragment life cycle and how does it work with our activity? So basically, we have the on attach method. So this on attach is a method. On attach is a method which will get attached, like the fragment gets attached to our activity. The fragment gets attached to our activity in the on attach method that we see here. Excuse me. And now on create is a method. So first, this on create method executes after the on create method which is present in the activity, and the on create view method that you see here. So there are two things, don't get confused with on create and on create view. On create is a method which will provide which will create the fragment, and on create view is a method which will give the user interface for our fragment. So on create is a method which creates a fragment, and on create view is a method which will create the user interface for our fragment. Is that clear? If it is confusing, guys, you can just ask me any question. Okay, if you don't have any questions, we'll just continue. So on create is a method which will create the fragment. And one more thing, fragment can be present with or without the user interface. Fragment can be present with or without the user interface.
Hello.
The on attach method here will attach the fragment to the activity, and the on create method here will create the fragment, and on create view method creates the UI for the fragment.
Hello, Ranjit.
Yeah, please.
There's one question. You mentioned that with fragment can you create with user interface and without user interface. My question is, what exactly you mean by this statement? Like I didn't able to understand, because when we see any application in the mobile, it's always user interface. Like what you view in that application, na? That is user interface, right?
Yes.
So without user interface means what it is?
See, without user interface means it'll just functionally work. It'll be giving you something, but it is not visible to you. That is what I mean. So fragment can be
Maybe
with or without user interface.
like say for example, there's some telephony API it is accessing, like that you mean to say, or like
Might be.
camera where, or
No.
camera
Camera and all,
or
it comes on the. Please, 1 second. Camera and all is a different concept. So you just or let me not confuse you too much. Don't think about the UI part right now, or without the UI part. Just concentrate only on the UI part. Fragment is something which has the user interface and which has the behavior. I'll give you an example for the other ones a little later.
Okay, fine.
Now on attach, and it creates the user interface in the on create view method. Now all these things, all these methods will execute after the on create method of the activity in which this fragment is going to be present. So what that means and how we should take this forward is, let's just create an app right now. Okay, fragment example. The minimum required SDK for a fragment is 11, so I'm just changing it to 11. Next, and I'll make this empty activity. Finish. So this will just give me a plain activity. And one more thing that I want to tell you is I'm going to have only one single activity here. That's all. I am going to have only one single activity. That's all. I'm not going to have multiple activities. I'm just going to have a single activity, but that single activity would consist of multiple fragments. So if you're getting too much confused, don't worry. There is an activity, and that activity will be and that activity will contain several fragments. So we'll see how does it contain several fragments and how do we create fragments basically. So right now this is our main activity, and this is the normal stuff that you see here. So we have an activity and that's all. We don't have anything else along with this. So how do we create a fragment for this one is something that we are going to do right now. Now, in order to create a fragment, fragment will have the user interface also. Is that clear? And now we shall just create a fragment by just right clicking here, go to new and create something called as a Java class. That's all. Or you can do it this way. This is a plain class creation, or we can do it in some other way. So let me just create the first fragment in this way, next fragment in some other way. So I'll make it as fragment 1. The fragment 1, I'll click on OK. Now, public class fragment 1, that's all. I'll just tell extends fragment. So I'll just tell this extends fragment. Now once I've told this extends fragment, we have several methods. So we have several methods wherein we can use different methods here. So we basically have the on create view. We're not worrying about on attach, on create and all. We'll just see what is the on create view. But for your reference, what we can do is we can also override the on attach, on create and then on create view methods now to see the flow of the application. So how do we generate all these things without writing much? Right click, go to generate, and we'll go to override methods. And in this override methods, on attach, on create view. So we have overdone all these methods right now. On attach, on create view. On attach, on create view. These are the methods that you override. So we have overdone it, and these are the methods. Log.e Okay, in order to just check which method is executing at what point of time, I'm just putting some log statements. Why I'm putting it E is because it appears in red color. It will be brighter in order to just check out. That's all. So 3 methods that we have overridden, and one thing that we need to make sure is these fragments are going to be inflated. Basically, these fragments are going to be present on the activity during the runtime. That is, once the activity is created, the fragment will go and sit on top of an activity. That is what we are going to do. For that concept, we'll be using the inflator. And what are we going to inflate? This fragment doesn't have any user interface right now. Now, how to create the UI only for the fragment? Just go to layout, just create a layout for your fragment. Create a layout, linear layout. We'll call it as frag_1. Background, color. I'll just give some primary color or whatever color I feel like. Let me just give the accent color itself. So I've given background color, and not to just determine whether the frag is created or not. So I'll put some text. Okay, I don't care about the text view name here. Just make it as this is fragment 1. This is fragment 1. Layout gravity that we have given, and margin top, and give like 10 dp. Okay, we have fragment 1 here, and let me just create another button here. Margin top is 30 dp. Click. So this is the button that we have just created. So if you see here, this is the button. So now we are done. So let me just give some margin bottom also. Not to beautify it, that's all. Okay, we have these things. And now I'll go to my main activity. I'm not doing anything here. In my XML, let's edit this one also in order to make sure it's clear. This is main activity. So we have this one, and just scroll down. We have something called as fragment here. So I'll click on this fragment, and here it is appearing like reference fragment, web view fragment, list fragment, fragment 1, dialog, and something else and all. So I'll have this fragment 1. So I'll select this fragment 1, click on OK. So I've just placed a fragment here. It's like some 50 dp. Now it is below text view, align right and end and all. Just cancel it. And I'll make it like horizontal center. Center horizontal true. Okay, I have a fragment here. So let me just run this during the runtime. We'll see just like how it appears on the screen. It's just executing. Just give me some time. Okay, let it execute and let's show the output. Meanwhile, let's just create this other fragment. I'll just right click here, and this way I'm just going to use the default way that. So I'll right click, go to new, and we have something called as fragment itself. I'll just go to blank fragment. I'll uncheck these things. So these things not required at this point of time. So create a binary file. So I'll call this one as fragment 2. Call this one as fragment 2. Okay, so we have this, and we have fragment 1 here. So the fragment 1, the UI creation is nowhere pointing to your, where is that, frag underscore 1. So this is not being pointed. So what we should do in order to do that, so basically this method has a return type as view. So I'll just create a view here, and since we are going to create something on the runtime, or that is dynamically, or putting something on top of an existing activity, we'll use the layout inflator concept. So I'll tell inflator dot inflate, and it asks me to give the resource file. The resource file is r.layout.frag underscore 1. So I'll give r dot layout dot frag underscore 1, and the next thing would be the root. So root would be the container, the same container whichever is being passed. That basically this layout belongs to that container. That's what it means. And finally, we should give attached to root or something. So attached to root, you just make it as false, and don't return the super dot on create and all these things. This one should return view. So this one is returning view, and now, okay, this is, we'll just execute this application again. Now what happens here is, on your main activity, that is your XML file, you have these fragments. You have these fragments, fragment 1. So this fragment is being executed at this point of time. Now the fragment 1, this class is basically this one. So now this class is pointing to this view that you see here. This view that you see here, and that view is going to be this particular thing that you see on the screen. Now if you see here, this is a fragment, this is fragment 1. Click, and I've given some margin below. That's why it's coming like this. So this text view belongs to main activity. This one belongs to a fragment. Now how to add another fragment? How to add another fragment to our main activity? You basically come back here, go to the design part, scroll down, you have this fragment, and now here if you see, there is something like fragment 2. Select that and just place like wherever you want. So this is my second fragment, horizontal true, vertical true. Vertical true, I'll just remote horizontal true, and margin from top, all these things I'll use the same thing, but instead of text view 2, I'll make it as fragment. So if you see here, these are the components that are placed here. Main activity, fragment 1, fragment 2, that's all. Now the UI for fragment 2 is nothing. It just tells our text telling that this is fragment 2. That's all. Hello blank fragment, something like that will be showing. So if I execute this one, it will just show me 2 fragments in the same activity. And now if you want to observe the UI, so if you really want to observe, like, sorry, not UI, what has been executed. So if you see here, on attach, on create view, these are the things which in sequence got executed based on the life cycle that you see here: on attach, on create, and then on create view. Okay, we have these things. So this is our button, main activity, and our blank fragment. And now, what is the use of this, and how can we do things based on this? So how do we dynamically create the user interface? If at all I don't require something, what should I do? Or if I have some three buttons, like how can I basically create a fragment, and how can I place a fragment uh, there, or how to dynamically change these things, or how to communicate between these fragments? There'll be lots of questions. So first, just see like how can I communicate? Like when I click on this click here, it should send a message to this blank fragment. So we have something like hello blank fragment. In place of this one, there should be a message sent from this application. I'm sorry, this fragment to this fragment, so that there is some kind of communication happening. So how to make that possible? So for that, let me just add some ID in order to reference it. I'll make it as display fragment. Okay, something like display fragment. So we have this main activity. And now, who will communicate between this fragment and this fragment? That should be obviously main activity, because that is something which contains both the fragments. But how can we make the communication smoother? Or what is the best way in which we can communicate with each other? So what is the best way in which we can communicate with each other? So these things comes into picture right now. Now, what is the best way is we can just create something called as an interface. So I'll just go here. I'll call this as okay, message passer. I'll make this message passer as an interface. I think you would have learned about like what is an interface in Java. So basically an interface is something which contains only the prototypes of a method. Sorry, yeah, only the prototypes of a method. What is a prototype if you ask me? So prototype is just going to be the name, that is a declaration of a method. So let me just declare a method called public void. I'll call it as on message. So this is the method which accepts a string. It accepts a string called as message, which will accept a string called as message. We just have something like public, let me see, public void on message. It accepts a message, and somebody who overrides this, or somebody who implements this interface, will have to override this method. That is, they have to give the body for this method. Now who is going to do that? Our main activity is going to do that. That is, I'll just tell implements message passer, and once I tell implements message passer, it's basically an interface. So whoever implements this particular interface, they must give the body for this method on message. So how to give the body? So you can just tell, use this key alt and enter, which will give you the options. So it'll tell implement methods. So I'll select implement methods. We have this on message with the string message here. So whatever method you have, you should at least give the empty body for that particular method. So I've given an empty body for now, but let's give something else a little later, not right now itself, a little later. Now, who is sending the message? Fragment 1 will send the message, and fragment 2 is the receiver, and main activity and this interface is going to be the mediator between these two things. Is that clear? Anyone having any questions at this point of time?
My question is, in memory parser means it is like a pipe or something, you know, buffer, you send some data from this application to that application.
I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
No, if you understand that operating system concept like buffer, pipe, all these like message queuing, all this is a similar kind of thing, message person, or it is something else?
No. The message passer is a customized name which I've given. So that
Oh,
name can be anything. The interface name can be anything. To just make some
oh,
sense, I just give something called
oh,
as
oh,
message passer.
okay. Oh, 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 I
It's not
understand that.
related to any of your operating system, your shared
Like,
memory or message passing concepts
yeah.
that you have. This is
Oh
a
no.
different one.
Okay, okay, okay.
This is just a name that I've given. That's all, nothing else. Is
Okay.
that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just get back to the application. So fragment one is going to be somebody who will be sending the message. So how when do we send the message? So whenever the person clicks on the button which is given in the by the fragment one. So what is that button? You ask me. Just go to fragment one. This click is that particular button. Now what I'll do is I'll use this method called as on activity created. So if you just see here, on activity created is a method. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, on activity created is going to be a method which is going to run after your on create view method. So if you see here, on activity created is something which is going to be called after the on create view. So how can we do this? So on activity created, after this we are going to override the on create view method. So I'll tell button click. So click, I'll just initialize it here. I'll tell I cannot call the find view by ID method here because whatever we create, so either your activity will have the authority to call the find view by ID method, or the view class will have the authority to call the find view by ID method. So what I'll do is I'll call the get activity dot find view by ID. From fragment, you cannot directly call the find view by ID method, or in other words, what you can do is you can declare this as a global entity, define this as a global entity, and instead of telling get activity, you can just tell view dot find view by ID, because the finding view which you are whatever you're finding belongs to this frag one itself. So I'll tell r dot id dot click. I'll typecast it with a button, and I'll tell click dot set on click listener, and I'll tell this. So if I tell this, then I must implement the on click method which is given by the on click listener interface. So we have these things ready at this point of time, and from here whenever I click, a message has to be sent through the message passer that we have here. Now how to do that? So the message passer is being implemented in the main activity. Now we need to create an object for the message passer in order to pass the message. So how do we do that? So I'll create a message passer, and I'll tell message passer dot on message, and whatever message you want you can just pass here, but we'll just pass like Okay, we'll just pass something called as count. So whatever the number of times that you're clicking, let it pass the count value there. So since it's an integer, I'll just convert that integer into string. Telling string dot value of count. But right now what happens is, if you directly call this, it will create a null pointer exception because this message passer is just declared, it is not initialized. So you need to initialize the message passer also. So how to initialize the message passer? So you just initialize the message passer by telling message passer equal to get activity. So you just tell get activity, it'll get the activities reference. But it has to be typecasted of type message passer because it's of type message passer. So I'll tell typecast it with message passer because get activity will get it because anyways you're implementing the message passer, so it doesn't create any problem. So on message method will be called from your fragment 1, so that will be passing the count number of time here. Now your main activities on message will have the count number of time. Now somebody in your second part, that is in your second fragment, should be capable of setting that text again back to the whatever view that you have. So to that view it should set that particular text. Now who will do that? Again, there is nothing like on activity created here. So I will create a method called as on activity created, and on activity created I will just create a text view here called as display count, and then I'll tell display count equal to, so there is nothing like view which I'm just directly using it. So it's not wrong to call the get activity dot find id method.
ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ
I'll tell
ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದೆ ಬಟ್
sorry,
ಇಂದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂದ ಇದು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂದ ಬಿಗಿನಿಂಗ್ ಇಂದ
hello guys, please put yourself on mute. I think there is some crosstalk happening. Okay, so now we have this display count, and I'll have to initialize the text view here. I'm sorry, the text view which we have created here. We call it, okay, we have just made it as display fragment. That's okay, whatever ID that we want, we can just use it. So I'll tell display fragment, and I'll typecast it with this kind of text view here. Okay, we have initialized the text view here, and somebody will pass that. So this on message will have the string that will be passed to this method. So what we should do with that, we'll just see right now. So we got this thing, but in order to pass it to the other fragment, we need to have a reference to the other fragment. So from the first fragment has our reference, that is the activities reference, so that they send this message. But from second fragment, from main activity to send it to second fragment, should have the reference of the second fragment. So what I'll do is I'll just create the reference for the second fragment. I'll call it as fragment 2. Fragment 2 is something that I've created. Now let me just initialize that fragment whenever the button is clicked. I'll tell get fragment manager dot find fragment by ID r dot id dot, what is the fragment's ID? It is fragment 2. Now if you're getting confused like why do we give it as fragment 2 here, it's just because if you see here, the second fragment that you have here is called as fragment 2. The second fragment which is present here is called as fragment 2, and we find the fragment. So I'll tell fragment 2 dot set message. So I don't have a method called a set message, but still I'm calling it, and I'll pass this message here itself. And from here, I'll just create a set message method here. And once I get the message, I'll just tell display count dot set text. Whatever message I get, I'll just set it here. And now the cycle is complete. So when you click the button on the first fragment, it'll send the message, and that message will be sent to your second fragment. Is that clear? Anyone having any questions?